Welcome to the debate. Today, we are turning our attention to the snow-covered streets of Davos, Switzerland, for an analysis of the 56th annual meeting of the World Economic Forum. The official banner hanging over the Congress Center this year reads, "A spirit of dialogue." It's a pleasant diplomatic phrase, intended to evoke cooperation. But if you read the fine print of the Global Risks Report 2026, or if you just listen to the conversations happening in the hallways, that spirit is being tested by a brutal new reality. We are seeing a convergence of risks that the WEF has labeled geoeconomic confrontation. So, the central question we're debating today is this. Is the global order simply transitioning into a new, messier phase of selective cooperation? Or, as some very prominent voices are suggesting, has the order finally and completely ruptured?
I think the time for euphemisms is, it's over. Transition implies we're going from point A to point B in some kind of orderly fashion. What happened at Davos 2026 was not a transition, it was a demolition. We witnessed the post-war order, the very thing this conference was built to uphold, just dissolving in real time. I mean, you have Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney openly stating that we are in a rupture. You have the United States threatening trade wars against its closest military allies over territory. The question isn't whether we can cooperate anymore, it's whether international law even still exists, or if we've just officially reverted to the law of the jungle.
Okay, I hear that, and demolition captures the mood, I'll give you that, but I don't think it captures the mechanism. My argument is that the global order isn't dead, it's shedding its skin. The universal consensus of the 1990s is gone. Yes, absolutely. But what we saw in Davos, with 3,000 leaders and 65 heads of state, that wasn't chaos. It was a reorganization. We are moving toward what they're calling minilateralism, small, exclusive alliances that are capable of actually getting things done rather than a paralyzed UN. The turbulence we see, even the ugly stuff, is forcing a necessary honesty. Europe is finally waking up to the reality of strategic autonomy. So this isn't the end of order. It's the birth of a harder, more pragmatic realism that can actually solve technical challenges like the energy transition.
That is an incredibly optimistic way to describe a hostage situation. I look at the facts on the ground and I just see predatory nationalism. The rules-based order is now a fiction. I mean, when the United States arrives with a proposal to essentially force the sale of Greenland through economic coercion against its own NATO allies, that is not minilateralism. That is a shakedown. And on top of that, the physical constraints we're seeing emerge this year, specifically the electron gap in AI and the water crisis in data centers, they are creating zero-sum conflict. You cannot dialogue your way out of a water shortage. The Davos model is obsolete because it relied on this assumption that trade prevents war. Well, 2026 has proven that trade is now just another weapon of war.
I want to challenge that immediately, because you're conflating friction with failure. But let's go straight to the elephant in the room, or I guess the iceberg, the Greenland situation.
Yeah, it's the defining moment of the conference. Let's be really clear about what is happening here, because the details matter. The Greenland tariff standoff isn't just some real estate deal gone wrong. The U.S. administration has explicitly linked trade policy to territorial acquisition. They are threatening 10% to 25% tariffs on key industries in Denmark, Norway, and Finland.
All NATO allies.
Exactly. All NATO allies, unless there is movement on the sale of Greenland.
The U.S. argument, however aggressive, is based on strategic security. I mean, they cite missile warning systems, rare earth minerals essential for the tech sector, and, control of Arctic shipping lanes. They view it as a vulnerability they just can no longer tolerate. They're securing the northern flank.
Strategic security is the excuse every empire uses to grab land. Look at the precedent this sets. The U.S. is telling the world that if you are a smaller nation, your sovereignty is conditional. If a superpower wants your territory for security, they can just destroy your economy until you hand it over. This legitimizes the exact narratives we criticize in Russia or China. I mean, how can NATO function when the leading member is effectively holding a gun to the heads of the Nordic members? That isn't an alliance. It's a protection racket. It fundamentally undermines Article 5.
If you are willing to bankrupt your ally to buy their land, are you really willing to die to defend them?
It is certainly a crisis of trust, I won't deny that. But if you look at the reaction in the Congress Center, it's producing the exact opposite of a collapse. It is unifying Europe in a way that, frankly, polite diplomacy never could. You have Ursula von der Leyen and French President Macron using this crisis to finally, after years of just talk, galvanize real support for European independence in defense and supply chains. And look at Germany. Chancellor Friedrich Merz walked into Davos and effectively declared, "Germany is back." He was openly skeptical of the U.S. position.
Being skeptical is fine. Having the power to do something about it is different.
But that's my point. This pressure is forcing Europe to build that power. For decades, Europe outsourced its security to the U.S. Now that the U.S. is unreliable, Europe is being forced to grow up. This isn't chaos. It's the emergence of a true multipolar balance where Europe finally acts as a serious counterweight. That is a healthier dynamic in the long run than dependency. It forces them to invest in their own industrial base.
A healthier dynamic? You are describing the fracturing of the Western security architecture. Mark Carney put it best in his address. He quoted Thucydides, "The strong do what they can and the weak suffer what they must." He wasn't saying that as a history lesson. He was describing the current diplomatic climate. Allies are diversifying not because they want autonomy, but because they are terrified. They're hedging against a hegemon they can no longer trust. That isn't a balance. That is a scramble for survival. When you break the trust that underscores the Atlantic Alliance, you don't get a stronger Europe. You get a paranoid, fragmented continent looking for new protectors.
But Carney also said that middle powers need to work together. He explicitly called for countries like Canada and the European states to build strategic autonomy while maintaining their values. He's not telling them to give up. He's saying that if the old rules no longer protect you, you must build new coalitions that do. That proves that agency still exists outside the superpowers.
It proves the building is on fire. You're praising the residents for learning how to use a fire extinguisher while ignoring the arsonists standing in the lobby. But look, the political rupture is only half the story. The other reason dialogue is failing is that we are hitting hard physical limits. We need to talk about the electron gap.
This is crucial. This was the dominant economic theme of the week.
Exactly. For the last 3 years, we've talked about AI as if it were magic, just code in the cloud. Davos 2026 has slapped us with the physics. AI is infrastructure. It is steel, it is copper, and most importantly, it's electricity. The electron gap is the massive disparity between nations that can generate the gigawatts needed to power these models and those that can't. OpenAI and the other tech giants have been very clear. China's advantage in electricity production, coal, nuclear, renewables, all of it, is becoming the decisive factor in AI supremacy. This isn't about who has the best algorithm anymore. It's about who has the juice.
That is true. But that constraint is exactly where the economic opportunity lies. I was listening to Ignacio Galan, the chairman of Iberdrola, and he framed this perfectly. He argued that electrification is the revolution that enables all the others. The ravenous demand from AI is driving a massive, unprecedented investment in grid modernization. Iberdrola alone is putting up $58 billion. This demand shock is exactly what we need to accelerate the energy transition. AI isn't just a drain, it's the wealthy customer that makes the green grid economically viable.
But the timelines do not match up. You are talking about grid upgrades and small modular reactors, SMRs, that take a decade to permit and build. The AI bubble, and plenty of economists at the forum are calling it that, is expanding now. The demand for compute is doubling every few months. And the cost isn't just electricity, it's water.
Water is certainly a concern, but
It's more than a concern, it's a conflict multiplier. We saw reports surfacing at the conference that GPT-4o, inference-so, just running the model to answer questions, not even training it, consumes fresh water equivalent to the annual drinking needs of 1.2 million people.
wow.
It's staggering. We are seeing the Jevons paradox in real time.
Okay, so for the listeners, let's just clarify the Jevons paradox in this context so we are all on the same page.
Right. It's the economic rule that as technology gets more efficient, the total consumption of that resource actually goes up, not down. We thought better AI chips would use less power per calculation. Well, instead, because they are so efficient and useful, we are just using millions more of them. The aggregate demand explodes. Data centers are becoming the new oil fields, strategic sites that consume massive amounts of local resources. When you have a data center draining the local water table in a drought-stricken region just to power a chatbot, that is not cooperation. That is a recipe for social fracture.
I see the risk, but I think you're underestimating the industry's ability to adapt. The focus on sovereign AI that we're hearing about, where nations build their own domestic capabilities, that actually allows for better local regulation of these resources. If France builds a sovereign AI cluster, they control the water and power permits. They can mandate cooling technologies that use gray water or salt water. And regarding the energy mix, the IEA's Fatih Birol noted that this demand is forcing a diversification that includes nuclear. It's messy, yes, but it's forcing a technological maturation. The electron gap is a challenge, but capital is aggressively moving to close it.
Capital is moving, sure, but where is it going? It's staying in the fortress. And that brings us to the failure of the global reset regarding climate and the economy. You have Al Gore walking around Davos talking about a climate policy recession, and he's right. The focus is shifted entirely to security and defense. It's guns over butter.
That is a valid concern, but the mechanisms are evolving. We aren't seeing the big, sweeping global treaties of the past because, like we established, the consensus is dead. But look at the report from KPMG and the WEF on mobilizing private capital. They are shifting strategy toward minimalism, creating specific risk-sharing mechanisms to get money into emerging markets. They're acknowledging the public sector is broke or paralyzed, so they're designing specific financial instruments to de-risk private investment. It's a move from high-minded rhetoric to financial engineering that can actually work in a fragmented world.
Financial engineering is a polite way of saying the poor are getting left behind. The climate finance gap for emerging markets is $1 trillion annually. Private capital is risk-averse. In a ruptured world, what Mark Carney calls a world of fortresses, money stays home. It stays in the US or Europe or China. The global South isn't seeing this minilateralism as a helping hand. They see it as exclusion. This is why we're seeing the rise of alternative blocs like BRICS gaining so much traction. The Davos consensus promised that globalization would lift all boats. Instead, we have a broken global reset where the West circles the wagons and everyone else is told to fend for themselves.
But the fortress economy isn't the only outcome. The fact that 130 countries are represented here suggests they haven't given up on the platform. They are negotiating. And even the Board of Peace proposal, as controversial as it is, shows a desperate attempt to find some mechanism for conflict resolution.
Oh, I'm glad you brought up the Board of Peace, because it is the perfect, almost cynical example of why this system is rotting. For those who missed it, this is a proposal for a new conflict resolution body. But the kicker, it has a $1 billion membership fee.
It's a steep barrier to entry, intended to ensure commitment. It's a bond.
It's the commodification of diplomacy. It is literally pay-to-play conflict resolution. It completely strips away any moral or legal standing from the process. It frames peace not as a human right or a legal necessity, but as a luxury transaction for the wealthy. If that is the future of the global order, where you have to buy a ticket to sit at the peace table, then the spirit of dialogue is just an auction house. It proves the system isn't adapting. It has lost its moral compass entirely.
I would argue it proves the system is adapting to a transactional reality. We might not like it. Ideally, sure, we would have a functioning UN Security Council. We don't. So if the choice is between a paralyzed UN and the transactional Board of Peace that actually brings rival parties to a table because they have skin in the game, well, some might argue that is better than nothing. It's ugly, but it's pragmatic. It forces nations to put their money where their mouth is regarding peace.
Or it ensures that only the rich can afford peace, while the poor fight proxy wars.
That is the risk. But let's step back and look at the big picture as we wrap up. We've covered the political rupture with Greenland, the physical limits of the electron gap, and the financial fragmentation.
It's a bleak picture.
I look at this conference and I see a world that is waking up from a long dream. The dream of easy globalization, where everyone gets along and trade solves everything. That's over. That's the rupture. But what comes next isn't necessarily the apocalypse.
We are seeing Europe move towards strategic autonomy forced by the Greenland crisis. We are seeing a race for sovereign AI that is driving a massive energy revolution, solving the electron gap with capital and innovation. We're seeing middle powers like Canada and Germany step up. This isn't the end of the world. It is the world adapting to a harder and more complex reality. The spirit of dialogue is no longer about polite agreement. It's about survival negotiation. And that negotiation is vital.
I see the same signals, but they point to a much darker destination. I think adaptation is just a euphemism for a dangerous free-for-all. When tariffs are used to virtually annex territory, as we see with Greenland, international law is dead. When fresh waters drain to power chatbots while the global south faces a trillion-dollar finance gap, we are prioritizing machines over human survival. We're left with what I call a savanna dynamic, predators and prey, masked by business-casual attire in the Swiss Alps. The rupture isn't clearing illusions, it's clearing the path for raw power. And the weak, as Carney warned, are suffering what they must.
Well, there is certainly no shortage of things to worry about, but also no shortage of work to be done. We want to thank you for joining us for this analysis of the fault lines of Davos 2026. We encourage you to dig into the source material, particularly regarding the Greenland tariff crisis and the specifics of the electron gap, to decide for yourself if this is a negotiation or a hostage situation.
Absolutely. Don't just take our word for it. The data's out there, and the cracks in the ice are visible to anyone willing to look.
Until next time, keep the debate going. Welcome to the new reality.